I'm Clara, 28. I arrange things, peonies, roses, eucalyptus sprigs that people will use to celebrate moments or to grieve them. I live just on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, in a little neighborhood where the sound of drizzling rain is more common than car horns. My flower shop isn't grand, just a modest space tucked into a strip mall, right between a tech repair place and a bakery that's been there forever. I've been open for just under a year. After my engagement ended, I stopped wanting anything that wasn't rooted in the ground, relationships most of all. I crave my solitude. I like the predictable rhythm of my days, but I'm learning that life has a way of disrupting the quietest routines. It all began on a Thursday, a little after my 10 o'clock a.m. opening. I was trying to wrestle two enormous boxes of ceramic pots from my car to the shop door, one balanced precariously on top of the other. At first, I was just focused on not dropping them. I had my hair thrown up in a haphazard knot, was wearing a paint-splattered sweatshirt that had seen better decades, and jeans that bore the permanent stains of my work. The guy from the repair shop next door was just locking up his van. He offered to get the door for me. His smile was unassuming, a little weary. "Here, let me get that for you," he said, his voice calmer than I expected. "Thanks," I managed, out of breath. I completely misjudged how awkward these would be. "No worries," he replied with a slight shrug. "We've all been there." I didn't give it a second thought, but the following afternoon, he gave me a small wave as I was hauling a bag of soil from my trunk. "You must be the new flower lady," he called out. "On my best days," I answered. "On the bad days, I just talk to the plants until they cheer up." He let out a soft laugh. "I'm Leo." That was how it started. From that point on, I'd catch glimpses of him through my shop's front window, hunched over a laptop, talking patiently to a frantic customer, or sipping coffee with a focused intensity, as if it were the one piece of code he couldn't crack. Our interactions were minimal at first, just polite greetings, the kind you exchange with neighbors that you hope are friendly but don't want to get too involved with. A few days later, we happened to stand in line together at the bakery. I was in front of him, and when I realized he was behind me, I offered to buy his coffee. "Absolutely not," he insisted. "You're the new business on the block." "It's my treat. Are you sure?" I asked. "Completely. Welcome to the neighborhood. A black coffee." He didn't put up a fight. Within a couple of weeks, we had settled into a gentle pattern, nothing formal, just brief chats during our breaks, acknowledgement nods across the parking lot, and the occasional shared look of exasperation when a client was being difficult nearby. He was making this unfamiliar place feel a little less like an island. One sunny afternoon, a rarity in this corner of Oregon, I was arranging a display of small succulents on a table outside. I had dirt smudged on my cheek, a pen tucked behind my ear, and I felt a sense of belonging that was both comforting and terrifying. I looked like I was starring in some low-budget film about finding yourself after heartbreak. He walked past on his way to his van and paused. "You know, if we were actual neighbors, I think I'd accidentally develop a massive crush on you." It was a throwaway comment, a light-hearted joke meant to break the silence, but I looked up from a prickly pear cactus, met his eyes, and said, "Good thing we're just shop neighbors then." The way I delivered it wasn't defensive or flirtatious. It was just honest, as if I was tired of playing games I didn't have the energy for anymore. And perhaps that was the truth. That evening, I replayed his words in my head. He'd said it to make me smile, I knew that, but there was a tiny sincere part of me that wished it wasn't just a joke, and that was the part I didn't know how to handle. I saw him again the next morning. I was sitting on the cold concrete curb behind my shop, nursing a coffee in a flimsy paper cup that felt insufficient against the morning chill. I had my earbuds in, trying to drown out the world, my legs crossed as if I could physically shrink away from my own thoughts. I saw him hesitate for a moment, a dead computer monitor tucked under his arm, clearly debating whether to approach me or to grant me the solitude I was so obviously seeking. He decided to walk by, murmuring a quiet, "Morning." I pulled one earbud out and looked up. "Hey," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. "Want some of this croissant?" I held up the half I hadn't touched. He stopped in his tracks. That might be the kindest offer I've received all month. I tore off the piece and held it out to him. "Don't say I never give you anything." We sat there in a comfortable silence for a minute, chewing our respective pastries and listening to the distant sound of a street sweeper. Eventually, he broke the quiet. "You doing okay?" I didn't respond immediately. Then, the words tumbled out before I could stop them. "Today's the anniversary." I waited for him to ask, but he just watched me patiently. A year ago today, I was supposed to be getting married. I stared straight ahead at the damp brick wall of the building across from us. He left about a month before the wedding. Just woke up one day and was gone. No dramatic fight, no other woman. He just said the feeling wasn't there anymore. A heavy silence settled between us. "Sorry," I added quickly. "That's a lot to dump on someone over a croissant." I saw him shake his head out of the corner of my eye. "No, don't be." He didn't tell me his own story then, but I could feel a strange kinship in his stillness, a recognition of that disorienting moment when the person who embodied your entire future suddenly becomes a painful memory from a past life. We didn't exchange many more words that morning. He eventually stood up, dusting crumbs from his jeans. "If you ever need anything fixed that isn't a phone, let me know. I'm also decent with leaky faucets, temperamental printers, and minor cases of existential dread." He managed to make me smile, a real smile that actually reached my eyes. The next few days settled back into our quiet rhythm. We didn't exchange numbers, we didn't make plans to see each other, but whenever our paths crossed in the parking lot, we would pause, just for a second, to share a word or a look. It was just enough connection to feel grounding without feeling threatening. One evening, I noticed his shop lights were still on long after he usually closed. I was reorganizing a shelf of vases that had been gathering dust for weeks. On impulse, I packed up the extra curry I'd made for dinner into a container. I found him at his workbench looking tired. "I made way too much," I said, holding up the plastic box. He looked from the container to my face. "That feels like a very transparent excuse to see me. Very transparent." He cleared off a cluttered stool in the corner. We ate mostly in silence at first, surrounded by the guts of machines and disembodied phone screens. I asked if he grew up around here, about 20 minutes from this spot. My grand act of rebellion was moving one town over. He smiled. "You're not from Oregon, are you?" "No," I admitted. "I was born in Southern California. Moved up here 6 years ago with my ex. I stayed after he left because running away felt like letting him win." I added, "And besides, I've grown to love the rain. That makes one of us." He mumbled into his food. He looked down at his own meal. "What about you? What's your story?" I took a slow bite. "I married my high school sweetheart. We divorced 3 years ago. It was quiet, no big blowout. We just realized we weren't on the same team anymore." He nodded with an understanding that felt deeper than words. "I used to believe that if something was broken, you just had to try harder. Use more glue, be more patient. But sometimes things break because they were never meant to hold together in the first place." There was a beat of silence, and then I heard myself say, "I guess I'm not really in a place to be looking for anything right now." "Me neither," he said. "But I don't think I'm completely shutting the door on it either." "Me neither," I repeated, this time more slowly, more for myself than for him. I left not long after that. I stood by my car and watched him lock his shop door, his silhouette small in the vast, empty parking lot, the sound of his footsteps on the damp pavement echoing in my head for longer than it should have. That weekend, I found myself glancing toward his shop every time I heard the bell on my own door jingle. I hated myself for it. I wasn't that person, the one who waits around hoping for a glimpse of someone she barely knows. But there was something about Leo that felt settled and familiar in a way that defied explanation. I finally saw him again on Sunday afternoon. I was outside trying to tape a flyer for a succulent sale to my front window. He came over and offered to hold the sign steady for me. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I know," he replied. "Just wanted to help." After a moment, he asked, "Do you ask all the handsome repairmen for help with your signs?" I laughed at his reversal. "Only the ones who share their croissants and listen to me overshare before M." He smiled, and I swear, for a brief second, he looked at me not just as the woman in the shop next door, but as something more solid, more real than that. We finished taping the sign and then just stood there for a moment. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full, charged with an unspoken shift between us. I turned to him and asked, "Do you ever feel like you're actively trying to keep your distance from something, just because you're terrified of what it might be if you got closer?" He looked directly at me. He didn't have to say anything. He just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, went back into his shop, and left me standing there, hands shoved in my pockets, thinking, maybe some people don't enter your life like a lightning strike. Maybe some just quietly pull up a chair next to you and wait patiently until you finally notice they've been there the whole time. It was a Thursday in late October, poised on that precarious edge between the last warmth of autumn and the first bite of winter, the kind of day that makes you unsure if you need a coat or just a good excuse to linger outside. Leo and I had reached an unspoken agreement to maintain our comfortable distance. We didn't text. We didn't make plans. We just seemed to occupy the same spaces at the same times more often than pure chance could explain. That week, a mutual acquaintance, Anya, the bubbly barista from the bakery we both frequented, had somehow convinced us both to volunteer at a local charity drive. It was about sorting donations, stacking endless boxes, and folding mountains of clothes. We both agreed because resisting her infectious enthusiasm felt like a bigger effort than just showing up. And so, there we were, inside a cavernous warehouse on the industrial edge of town, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, folding second-hand jeans into neat piles and trying not to speculate about their origins. Leo was working across a long folding table from me, his hair slightly disheveled, sleeves pushed up to his elbows. He wasn't smiling, but he looked peaceful. It seemed as though keeping his hands busy was his way of quieting his mind. We didn't speak much initially, just exchanged the necessary comments, how many boxes were left, whether we thought we'd ever earn a pizza break, and how bizarre it was to see fashion trends from our high school days being donated as vintage. At one point, someone handed me an old, ridiculously puffy wedding dress. I held it up, a wry smile touching my lips. Well, I guess this one didn't work out, I said, my voice dry. He chuckled. Somebody fairy tale just got donated to Goodwill. We continued folding. Someone put music on a small portable speaker, quiet classic rock ballads. Landslide came on, a song that always managed to gut me. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd of volunteers began to thin out. People left for other commitments, took long phone calls, or vanished toward the snack table. Before I knew it, it was just the two of us, working through a pile of winter coats, standing shoulder to shoulder as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I leaned back against the table, stretching my aching back with a soft groan. I am officially sick of other people's discarded clothing, I announced. That was quick, he replied without looking up. You held out longer than I did. I looked over at him. A slow, gentle smile was beginning to form on his face, and I don't know if it was the dim lighting, the sudden quiet, or the way a stray lock of his dark hair fell across his forehead, but the words came out before I could stop them. He joked, can you imagine the two of us as a couple? We'd probably be a beautiful train wreck. He said it with his usual lightness, as if the humor could shield the vulnerable part of him that might actually mean it. But I didn't laugh. I didn't look away. I just stood there, looking straight into his eyes. Then I tilted my head slightly, and the smallest, most fragile smile I think I've ever worn appeared on my face, a sad and warm and terrifyingly honest thing. And I said, my voice barely a whisper, I do. A lot. And then I turned, picked up a heavy box of jackets, and walked toward the back of the warehouse. There was no dramatic pause, no swell of music, no last lingering look. Just a woman who had spoken a terrifying truth and was now walking away before the man she'd said it to had a chance to shatter it with his response. I stood there like a fool, still holding a half-folded parka, my arms frozen mid-motion, my brain scrambling to catch up to what my mouth had just done. I do. A lot. I kept replaying the moment, his shocked expression, the slight widening of his eyes, the way I didn't wait for his reaction, as if I wasn't asking for anything in return, just releasing a truth I hadn't realized I'd been holding so tightly. We didn't speak for the remainder of the day. We found tasks in separate corners of the vast space, exchanged polite, distant smiles, and avoided each other just enough to make it seem accidental. When the event finally wrapped up, I grabbed my purse, gave Anya a quick hug, and offered him a small wave from across the dimly lit parking lot. No more words passed between us, just that look again, one that felt heavy with things unsaid, as if I was afraid I'd already revealed far too much. I drove home in absolute silence, the radio off, with nothing but the swish of my windshield wipers and the echo of his voice in my head. Can you imagine? That night, sleep was a foreign concept. I lay awake for hours, staring at the shadows on my ceiling, meticulously re-examining every brief conversation, every shared smile, every comfortable silence we'd ever had, and wondering how I had been so blind. Blind to what? To the fact that I wasn't just folding clothes next to a kind man who was also nursing old wounds. I was slowly, quietly falling for someone who seemed to see me more clearly than I saw myself. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, that realization didn't fill me with terror. It just made me ache with the desire to see him again. But what on earth could I possibly say now? What is the proper etiquette after you've confessed, without any preamble, that you've been imagining a life with someone? And the more terrifying question, what if he had been imagining it too? The next morning, I arrived at my shop 30 minutes early and didn't even notice until I'd unlocked the door and the chime reminded me how quiet the world still was. My mind was a tangled mess. I kept replaying my confession I do. A lot in the way it had just slipped out, unbidden and raw. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself it was just a fleeting moment. People say strange things when they're exhausted, standing under the unflattering glare of industrial lighting, surrounded by the ghosts of other people's lives. That's all it was, surely. Nevertheless, my gaze kept drifting to the front window. His repair shop opened earlier than mine, so I knew he was likely already there, but I couldn't bring myself to look directly. I caught a glimpse of his truck in its usual spot and immediately spun around, busying myself with a bucket of wilting daisies, as if I'd been caught spying. Pathetic. I was 28 years old, not a teenager with a crush. The bell on my door jingled around 9:15. My heart leaped into my throat. I looked up. It wasn't a customer. It was Leo. He was holding a small white paper bag, the kind the bakery next door used for single pastries. He walked in with a hesitant confidence, as though he'd done it 100 times before, even though this was his first. Peace offering, he said, his voice quiet, or an apology, whichever you think fits the situation better. I managed a weak smile. An apology for what? For making things weird yesterday, he said. I wasn't expecting. Well, I didn't know how to react. I gestured toward a tall stool I kept behind the counter, a place where I sometimes sat to work on delicate arrangements. Do you want to sit? He nodded and perched on it, his hands still clutching the paper bag, his gaze fixed on a pot of orchids. I'm not really sure what that moment was, I began, my voice unsteady. Maybe I was just exhausted, or maybe I actually meant it. Either way, I'm sure it caught you by surprise. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest, trying to project a calm I knew he didn't feel. Yeah, he admitted, it did, but not in a bad way. His words made me finally look at him. It made me think, he added. He paused, clearly searching for the right words, ones that wouldn't betray the fact that he'd probably been obsessing all night, just as I had. About how we started talking, he finally said, and how strange it is. I don't know your favorite movie or your middle name, but I know the sound of your laugh when a little kid is mesmerized by the roses. I know you fiddle with your necklace when you're lost in thought, and I know you always leave the last bite of any pastry you eat. A soft, involuntary smile touched my lips. That's incredibly observant. A silence filled the small space between us, not awkward or heavy, but thick with unspoken potential. He opened the bag. Inside was a single, perfect lemon poppy seed muffin. This is my peace offering, he said, because I figure if we're going to start saying things we don't mean to say, we should at least do it with baked goods involved. I laughed, a sound born more of relief than genuine humor. He broke off a piece with his hands and offered it to me. I took it. Do you ever do that? He asked softly. Say something completely real and then immediately wish you could press rewind button on the universe? All the time, I said. But sometimes, I think those are the only things that are actually worth saying. He nodded as if he already knew this to be true but needed to hear someone else say it out loud. We stood there for another 10 minutes, sharing the muffin and a comfortable silence. Just being in the same room without the world crashing down felt like a victory. Before he left, he paused at the door. I don't want things to be weird between us, I said, the words rushing out. Me neither, he replied, and I don't think they are. I think they're just changing. I liked the way he said that. I could tell it was the right word. He stepped outside, then turned back. You fix things, right? He asked, a ghost of a smile on his face. I raised an eyebrow. That's what the sign says. He held up a small dented metal box, an old film canister. My grandmother gave me this when I was a kid. It's supposed to be a time capsule, but I dropped it, and the lid is completely jammed. Think you can open it without destroying it? I took it from him. It was old and worn. I can try, I said. No promises. Good, he replied, because I'm not entirely sure I want promises right now anyway. He left after that. No hug, no dramatic farewell, just him walking back across the parking lot, leaving me with a stuck time capsule and at least a dozen more questions than I had an hour ago. That night, I sat at my workbench long after I'd locked up, fiddling with the small metal canister. I wasn't sure why I was so determined to open it, but I suspected it had very little to do with the canister itself. Maybe it was about the act of restoration, of taking something stuck and sealed shut and gently, patiently working until it opened. Something slow, something deliberate, something you couldn't force. I looked at the stubbornly sealed lid and thought, maybe that's how we're supposed to happen. Not in a sudden burst, not in a rush, but one careful, gentle movement at a time. A week went by. After I finally managed to open the canister, I didn't tell him right away. I could have had it done in an hour, but something about the task made me want to stretch it out, not because it was difficult, but because it gave me a reason to keep him in my thoughts. Leo didn't text, didn't stop by my shop, but he didn't vanish either. I saw him nearly every day through my front window, talking to customers, carrying equipment, sipping his coffee. The only thing that had changed was the way our eyes met across the parking lot. Not like strangers, not even like friends anymore, but like two people who had shared a secret they couldn't take back. On Friday, just as I was getting ready to close, he walked over to my shop holding a small, fixed-up vintage point and shoot camera. I looked up the moment the bell chimed, and my entire body relaxed, as if I had been holding my breath for this exact moment all week, even if I hadn't known it. Hey, he said. Hey. He handed me the camera. I took it, turning it over in my hands like a sacred object. You fixed it? I did, he confirmed. The lens was jammed, and it was missing a button. It works now. You'll have to track down some 35mm film, but it's ready to go. I ran my thumb over the new button, my touch gentle, as if I was afraid of breaking it all over again. Thank you, I said, my voice quiet. A long, significant pause stretched between us. Then I looked up and met his steady gaze. So, what now? I asked. Do we just go back to sharing pastries and pretending we don't spend our nights thinking about each other? He didn't respond immediately. He needed a moment, and I knew he had been thinking about this exact question all week too. No, he said finally. I don't want to go back to pretending. My own eyes didn't waver. I stood perfectly still. I don't either, I confessed. A palpable weight seemed to lift from the room, as if something invisible and heavy had finally stood up and walked out the door. I stepped out from behind the safety of my counter and stood directly in front of him. You should know I'm not looking for some grand romance, I said. I'm not 21 anymore. I don't need fireworks and drama, but I do need something real. I need quiet. I need steady. He nodded. I'm not trying to rush anything, he said. I want to be where you are. Whatever that ends up looking like, I smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made me feel as though I'd just heard something my heart had been desperate to hear, even if I hadn't known how to ask for it. I glanced down at the camera in my hands, then back up at him. Still imagining us together? I asked, my voice soft. He smiled back. No, he said. Now I'm just trying to live it. I didn't say anything else. I just stepped forward and wrapped my arms around his neck, an action that felt more natural and right than anything I had done in years. I let myself hold him tightly, completely, without any jokes or self-deprecation or waiting for the other shoe to drop. For the first time, nothing felt conditional. Nothing felt like it needed to be shielded by sarcasm or small talk. It simply was. We spent that evening wandering through our quiet neighborhood, with no destination and no agenda, just talking. Truly talking for the very first time, without any filters or guards. We talked about our lives, our pasts, the things that scared us, and the things we quietly hoped for. Then, without any ceremony or overthinking, he said, "Do you want to come over tomorrow? Just to hang out?" There were no hidden expectations in his voice. I said yes. The next day bled into the next week, which then became the next month. There was nothing explosive about it, just quiet breakfasts, movie nights on his comfortable couch, and long walks around the block. He would bring me strange, broken gadgets he thought were interesting, and I'd bring him leftover flowers that were too beautiful to throw away. We never put a label on it. We didn't rush toward a finish line, but we both knew exactly what it was. 3 months later, he was in the middle of my shop, helping me untangle a string of fairy lights, and I kissed him. "Just so you know," I said against his lips, "I'm not going anywhere." And he just said, "Good." He stopped imagining us a long time ago. So yes, that's how it ended. Or more accurately, that's how it finally began. No grand drama, no tragic misunderstandings, no dramatic exits. Just two people who finally stopped hiding inside their own broken stories long enough to start writing a new one together. No more jokes, no more waiting. Just him and me, right where we were always meant to be.